Last time I asked you guys for your most busted or most fun setups, and I severely underestimated the number of suggestions I was going to get. It took quite a while to go through them all and test them, and in the end I decided that today I'm going to showcase my favorite primary, secondary and melee setup. I also added another layer to it. One of the builds I really wanted to do and I was actually looking forward to it. One build I was actively avoiding and did not want to do. And the third build is kind of like a better version of a build that I already did. So without further ado, let's start with build number 1. This was a relatively vague suggestion that I've actually seen in the comments multiple times, and it's simply Kuva Kohm with primary crux. I had to figure this one out myself because even though there were numerous comments suggesting this, all of them were essentially just Kuva Kohm, primary crux, go. So here is what I did. Primary crux as the arcane, obviously. Then we have prime point blank for damage, galvanize L for multi-shot, galvanize savvy for status chance and condition overload, shotgun barrage for fire rate, vigilante armaments for more multi-shot, and then scattering inferno, toxic barrage and shell shock for heat and corrosive. I decided against using crit in favor of more fire rate via shotgun barrage as well as multi-shot via vigilante armaments, but you could very easily go with crit, especially if you have a Riven. At first I wasn't quite sure if dropping crit for fire rate and multi-shot was the right call, because combs generally are not great when it comes to ammo sustain, but the ammo efficiency from primary crux compensates for the increased fire rate very nicely. Additionally, the quite frankly ridiculous amount of multi-shot and status chance we get rips through enemies insanely fast. Enemies lose their armor within the first 1 or 2 shots and then you can just blast straight through their health. Fabulous setup. Things get even more ridiculous if you're running a priming pet. I was using Harold with vital, radiation, magnetic and heat, and this skyrocketed my damage even further thanks to the condition overload provided by Galvanized Aptitude. This is an absolutely top-notch setup. I would highly recommend it to anyone. It's fantastic. Yes, it's a little bit shorter ranged because, well, it's a shotgun, but outside of that, there are no real downsides to this. You simply run around, spray and pray, and that's kind of it. You don't have to aim down sights. The ramp up isn't that bad because we do have prime point blank, so we don't have to ramp up base damage. So in my eyes, this is an absolute 10 out of 10. Also, this is the build that I wanted to do. I actually had plans to do this. Now let's move on to the second build, the one that I actively avoided. Epitaph Prime with a whole bunch of multiplicative nonsense. This one was a little bit more specific in most of the comments. Pistol acuity, deadhead, galvanized shot, galvanized crosshairs, that kind of stuff. I don't think any of the comments described the build in its entirety, but there was enough there to where I only had to improvise with a few mods. So what I ended up doing is running secondary deadhead as the arcane, then we have magnetic might for magnetic damage and crit damage, prime target cracker for just crit damage, galvanized crosshairs for crit chance, galvanized shot for status chance and condition overload, prime heated charge for a ton of heat, pistol pestilence and jolt for corrosive and a bit of status, and then pistol acuity for weak point damage and crit chance. The idea is pretty straightforward. We have a bunch of multiplications, so we have the crit chance from galvanized crosshairs being multiplicative with the crit chance from acuity, the weak point damage from acuity is multiplicative with the headshot damage from deadhead, and the base damage from deadhead is multiplicative from the condition overload damage from galvanized shot. The rest is there to bump up elemental and crit damage. This setup focuses primarily on fully charged shots, but you can still use uncharged shots to do a little bit of priming. It's also the strongest, heaviest hitting setup that I have in my arsenal right now. It is absolutely ridiculous. You can easily hit 40, 50 million even on a lightly primed enemies, as long as it's a headshot or a weak point hit. However, things get absolutely silly, ridiculous even, once you add a priming pet. Because a solid priming pet can take you from hitting, anywhere between 40-50 million, child's play baby numbers, to easily hitting enemies for 400-500 million. It's just stupid. If you really min-max this, you can easily hit enemies for billions of damage. With that said, it's probably my least favorite of the 3 builds. It's kind of all or nothing. If you don't hit the head, the damage isn't great, but if you do hit the head, it takes the planet with it. But I can absolutely see why people really enjoy this. It is an extremely powerful build, one of the most powerful builds when it comes to one-shots, so if you're looking for a handheld railgun that can kill everything, I would recommend it over most things. Hell, even I'm gonna keep this in my arsenal, because sometimes you just need a build like this. So even though I'm personally not the biggest fan of builds like this, for what it is an absolute 10 out of 10. And finally, for build number 3, we have something that I already did, but you guys did it better. The weapon in question is the Arca Titron, and the build style is a big old salama jamma. Now this was actually a fully detailed build, so if you don't like the mods, don't yell at me, go yell at the person that told me to put them there, okay? We have whatever stance fits the polarity, and for the Exilus you can run Dispatch Overdrive for the movement speed, but you can just leave it blank as well. Then we have Galvanized Steel for crit chance and damage, Galvanized Reflex for heavy attack efficiency and base combo counter, Primed Fever Strike and Volcanic Edge for a ton of gas and a bit of status chance, Galvanized Elementalist for status damage and status chance, Blood Rush or a Riven for more crit chance, Seismic Wave for some damage, and then actually Primed Pressure Point for base melee damage, but I have an Umbra polarity so I had to go with Sacrificial Pressure instead. Now the arcane for this one is Melee Afflictions, because this is a heavy slam build and heavy slams lift enemies, so the idea here is that you slam into the enemies, proc a bunch of gas and electricity if you have some stacks of slam capacitor, and as the enemies get lifted up, Melee Affliction multiplies the stacks on them. This setup is so dumb, it actually one-shots max level Steel Path enemies in the Simulacrum with 0 ramp up. I was so confused when I tested it for the first time. I actually ran back and spawned another group of enemies because I didn't know what happened. I was like, where's the gas? And then I slammed them again and they all die again. I'm like, oh, so this is like stupid strong. Alright then. Now the cool thing about this build is that you can swap afflictions for melee influence, and while yes, you lose on the insane burst you get from affliction, you get a bunch of clear with influence. And while yes, the damage is considerably lower, it's still enough to deal with a lower level Steel Path enemy, so up to level about 200. The clear potential with influence is just as insane as the burst potential is with affliction. So if you want more damage, go with affliction. If you want bigger AoE, better clear, go for influence. The reason this works, even though we're not running electricity, is because of that unique trait. It's what's giving us the much needed electricity. Now the cool thing about these three builds is they actually work really well together. You can run the Kuva Kohm with the Epitaph Prime and the Arca Titron and have a very solid setup. The Kuva Kohm is a very carefree sort of spray and pray short to mid-range setup that does a ton of damage and clears decently well. Then there is the Epitaph, which has very long range, doesn't clear very well, but has insane one-shot potential. And finally we have the Arca Titron, which can be tailored for either more burst or more AoE, but the clear, no matter what, is going to be really good. And that is pretty much it, so I thank you very much for watching, as always guys, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. I would also like to extend a special thank you to all the channel members. Thank you very much guys, I really appreciate your support, it means a lot to me. And finally, I also want to thank everyone for your lovely suggestions. I've had a lot of fun going through them. And I will see you next time. Bye bye.